So today I'd like to start by reading a little snippet from a sutta or an ancient discourse or teaching given by the Buddha. And this is called Nalaka Sutta. It's from the Sutta Nipata, and it's see, this is a very interesting sutta, but I'm actually just going to read the last paragraph. Know from the rivers in the clefts and in crevices, those in small channels flow noisily, the great flow silent. Whatever is not full makes noise. Whatever is full is quiet. The fool is like a half empty pot, one who is wise, a full lake. I'll read this part again, maybe paraphrase a bit. So know from the rivers in clefts and in crevices that those in small channels, so small channels of water flow noisily, but the great flow silent. Whatever is not full makes noise. Whatever is full is quiet. The fool is like a half empty pot. One who is wise is like a full lake. A contemplative or meditator practitioner who speaks a great deal endowed with meaning, knowing he teaches the Dhamma, knowing he speaks a great deal. But he who knowing is restrained, knowing does not speak a great deal. He is a sage worthy of sagehood. He is a sage, his sagehood attained. Interesting that phrase, endowed with meaning. And the Buddha saying that one who speaks a great deal endowed with meaning is he's comparing that with one who is restrained in speech and does not speak a great deal. And there's something that's really beautiful about this to me. The imagery of a great river, very wide, how it doesn't make a lot of noise, it's not noisy. But these smaller kind of streams and channels flow noisily. I remember being a kid when the movie American Gangster came out. It's like a mafia movie with Denzel, and Denzel Washington plays Frank Lucas, if I remember correctly, the head of this uh, gang. And at one point in the movie, essentially he's this guy who rose up the ranks in this mob and becomes the head figure, and then he kind of gets a bunch of his brothers and I think cousins to come on board. And there's a point in the movie where I think it's his younger brother who's kind of new to this gangster life and has this newfound money and fame, and he's dressing noisily, dressing kind of very like noticeable clothing, and he's at this party and he's yapping around, high off some drug or something like that. And his brother Denzel's character kind of scolds him and says something about how the loudest person in the room is the weakest person in the room. And I remember being a kid, and when I heard that line, I was like really fixed on that line. So this is something we can understand on a relatively basic level, not even at a Dhamma level. We can understand that the one who's talking all the time, is probably not the one you're meant to follow. And it's interesting because nowadays, with media, there's all these talking heads that are sharing all kinds of different views and arguments. And these are our informers, the people who kind of inform the public about what's going on in the world. You have these talking heads on news channels, and one area that I think is interesting is in sports. In sports media, you will have uh like the most famous broadcasters in sports media build up these huge followings and these huge kind of TV programs based on the art of debate. So no matter what they're kind of talking about, they create a debate. And then they usually have a co-host who takes one side and they take one side. I'm thinking about um like what's his name? Skip Bayless and all those guys. An example like in the NBA is there's this huge debate about who's the greatest of all time. Is it Michael Jordan or is it LeBron James? And what's interesting with this kind of style of media is you you sort of enter the space, let's say basketball, and then you're confronted with this divisive notion. Is this guy the greatest or is this other guy the greatest? Right? Is LeBron or is MJ better? And so you're forced to take a position, you're forced to take a side. And people get very good at making well-informed arguments. This is how I think in today's world, this is sort of how intelligence is sort of viewed. Like how hard can you argue? Can you win an argument? Can you win a fight? And in the Buddhist time as well, there were so many different spiritual traditions in India, and there was a practice that was popular in India where the heads of or these teachers from these different traditions would go debate each other about certain spiritual philosophies and things of that nature. And the Buddha was not a fan of this. He was not one to take a view. And you can see by this phrase, whatever is not full makes noise. Whatever is full is quiet. The fool is like a half-empty pot, one who is wise, a full lake. When I hear this, it's so against the grain of modern day media. you know, you get these 1 minute clips or an hour long show, and um, whether it's a late night show where they're interviewing a celebrity or whatever, right? And there's always this conversation, there's always this debate. So you don't see someone who's just sitting there quiet, not saying anything. And if you did, you would think this person is a terrible guest or a terrible host, right? So we kind of evaluate people through this. We evaluate our friends, our community members by who gets the last laugh, who gets the last word in. Another sutta, also from the Sutta Nipata, where the Buddha um, it says something that's also on this topic. This is the Magandhya Sutta, Magandhya Sutta Nipata 4.9. So the Buddha says This idea of I argue for this does not occur for one when considering what's grasped among doctrines. Whoever construes equal, superior, or inferior, by that he would dispute. Whereas to one unaffected by these three, equal, superior, do not occur. I'll say that again. This idea that I argue for this does not occur to one when they consider what's grasped among doctrines. Whoever construes this notion of equal, superior, or inferior, by that construction he would dispute. Whereas to one unaffected by these three, this notion of equal or superior do not occur. Of what would the Brahmins say true or false, disputing with whom? He in whom equal, unequal are not. For one who is dispassionate towards perception, there are no ties. For one released by wisdom, there are no delusions. Those who grasp at perceptions and views go about butting their heads in the world. It's beautiful. And these are written in sort of verses, so I recommend reading these as well. It's a little bit easier to digest, but I'll try and paraphrase some of this. So he's sort of saying that there are some people who are affected by the notion of equal, superior, or inferior. So they dispute due to that affliction. But to one who is unaffected by these notions, the idea of equal or superior do not occur. Imagine that. Imagine that. It's really interesting. I work from home and I spend a lot of time alone. And when you spend a lot of time alone, you can kind of easily, there's like a juxtaposition. You can easily tell the difference from when you're alone, whereas when you're with others at, like, let's say, a social gathering. And when you're with others, what I find at least is I feel that people are constantly doing this thing of measuring equal, superior, inferior, measuring themselves against you, measuring you against them. And um, most people are not aware that they're doing this. It's almost subconscious. It's a subtle thing, but I feel that I feel this when I'm around most people. And you know what it's like when you're engaging in a conversation and everyone's sharing their views on a particular topic. Let's say it's a political topic or religious, or um, maybe they're gossiping about someone in the group, and everyone's got a position, and we all know what it's like when you voice up your position, and then but nobody assents to that. No one agrees with that. There's this kind of deflated feel, right? So imagine what it would be like to be unaffected by equal, superior, or inferior in such a way where these concepts do not even occur. So the Buddha sort of saying here, and I'm paraphrasing, what would a wise person call true or false? With who would they dispute with when the idea of equal or unequal do not exist for them? What is there to dispute about? For one who is dispassionate towards perception, there are no ties. Nothing is tying you down. Those who grasp at perceptions and views go butting their heads in the world. If you take this phrase to your next social gathering, you will see this butting of heads. And this is perhaps one of the things that feels gossip, right? When you're talking about someone who's not there, they're not there to defend themselves. So you don't have to butt heads with them. In another sutta, Sutta Nipata 3-9, it's called Vasetta. It's the name of the sutta. It's about how is one a Brahmin. Brahmin, if you're not aware, was the highest caste in India at those times. I think it still is. Sort of another word of saying like, so basically at that time, right, people were born into this caste of nobility, spiritual prowess, and sort of the top of society, right, and an elite upper echelon aristocrat. And in the sutta, to my memory, the Buddha kind of dismantles this notion of caste, and he says, how is one a Brahmin? And then he describes the qualities of a human being that would make them higher, not by birth, not by caste, but by these qualities. And one of the verses from the sutta that I've written down is unopposing among opposition, unbound among the armed, unclinging among those who cling. He is what I call a Brahmin. It's beautiful. Unopposing among opposition. What would it be like to be unopposing amongst a group of people who are in opposition? Unbound among the armed, unclinging among those who cling. He's what I call a Brahmin. When I read these ancient words from the Buddha, it really brings to mind how far our society has fallen away from this notion. And my understanding is, and when I read the suttas, is that this was a novel notion back then. This was against the grain 2,500 years ago. So, but it's still going on. This idea that I'll put it this way, like nowadays, if we're talking about politics, right? Like, let's say in America, which is where I live, but I imagine my understanding is that the world is starting to follow this direction, or much of the world anyway. But if people are talking about politics, there's a strong view that's being presented. And if there is someone amongst this group who does not hold that view, or who does not hold any political view strongly, they tend to be reprimanded, right? It's this idea that if you were a good person, you would believe this one view, whatever it is, whether it's about abortion or climate change or voting rights or whatever, right? And so each side supposes that their view on that topic is it's the righteous view, the virtuous view. It's the right one. So if you hold the other one, you could not be a good person, right? And that has been there for a long time, but now it's even to the point where if you don't hold this view as strongly as I do, if you don't see it to be such a problem, if it doesn't light you up with passion, then there's something wrong with you, right? And so you can, let's say amongst someone or a group of people who are really um there's a particular, let's say, activist view or whether it's conservative or liberal, it doesn't matter, but who take this view and it's so important to them. They feel it with so much intensity. And that becomes conflated with virtue. In other words, that gets mistaken for morality. And this happens in Buddhist circles too. It happens in religious circles as well. You know, if you don't do it this way, you're not a good Buddhist or whatever it might be. And and can you feel how against this way that I'm talking about, how against it the Dhamma is? What the Buddha is saying is not in alignment with this idea that we need to be strongly married to views. I'll repeat this phrase or this verse. Unopposing among opposition, unbound among the armed, unclinging among those who cling. He's what I call a Brahmin. I'll read another verse from another sutta. This is name of the sutta is Right Wandering, Sutta Nipata 2-13. This is spoken by the Buddha. Putting behind him divisive tale-bearing, a monk should abandon anger and meanness. With favoring and opposing totally abandoned, he would wander rightly in the world. Having abandoned dear and undear, independent through no clinging of anything at all, fully released from fetters, he would wander rightly in the world. He he finds no essence in acquisitions. Having subdued passion, desire for graspings, independent is he, by others unled. He would wander rightly in the world. Aspiring, I'll skip around a little bit, just for the interest of time. Aspiring to unbinding, he would wander rightly in the world. So you can see this refrain, he would wander rightly in the world. So this is sort of like how one can move rightly in the world, right? So to do this, you can put behind divisive tale bearing, divisive speech. And, it's interesting. One of the things I realized about myself a long time ago is I'm not speaking about my virtues or anything like that, but I've noticed that for me, I hate arguing. I really don't like the energy of an argument. But there are some people who really enjoy it. And like I said, it's become so popular in media. It's like every conversation It's almost as if there's no way to have a conversation without taking a position on something. So the Buddha is trying to speak about a different way of moving in the world, with favoring and opposing totally abandoning dear and undear. And I love this line, independent is he, by others unled. Beautiful. In whom there are no obsessions, his unskillful roots uprooted, with no longing, no expectations, he would wander rightly in the world. And it's interesting as this sutta goes on, it seems to go deeper and deeper towards a fully enlightened being. Victorious, pure, his roof opened up, a master of Dhammas, gone beyond and unperturbed, skilled in the knowledge of fabrication cessation, he would wander rightly in the world. And then here's another verse from Sutta Nipata 3-9 Vasetta Sutta, same one I mentioned a little while ago. This is a different verse from that same one. Here, he's what I call a Brahmin, spotless, pure like the moon, limpid and calm. His delights, his becomings, totally gone. He's what I call a Brahmin. Spotless, pure, like the moon. So spread your awareness throughout your whole body. And notice the coolness that comes when we consider this other way of wandering rightly in the world. When we consider this way of the awakened ones, unopposing, unobsessed, not going in the direction of division or divisiveness, not taking on views, not arguing, not comparing oneself to others, not measuring. Someone who is unaffected, uninvolved, someone in whom the notions of inferior, superior, or equal do not occur. It's really a radical thing. You might notice if there's something that you really like or you really want. Let's say it's health or wealth or travel or adventure or a relationship, love or beauty, a big house, whatever it is that you really want. You might notice that if someone someone who's in your circle, uh, gains that thing that you want, let's say before you do, and let's say you're meeting this person at a party and they tell you about it, in an instant, in a millisecond, you might feel this pain in your heart that makes you feel inferior. It happens so quickly. And it takes a lot of awareness to even see it. Most people would never admit that they have any ounce of jealousy or that they're not rooting for their friends. And it's not that we want to be this way. It's just this instantaneous reaction that comes because we want something so badly. And because we're constantly defining ourselves and solidifying ourselves, creating an identity for ourselves. So what would it be like to remember this teaching from the Buddha next time you walk into a party or a gathering? Unopposing, unbound, unclinging, not measuring. That's one of the things I want to really call out here, and hopefully that's clear. And the other thing that I touched on a little bit ago, I want to kind of um, come back to it, is this idea of morality that um, I think this is a sickness in the world right now. And I don't mean that to mean to say that the world is sick or anything, but I think this is a sickness that is growing, and it's out there in some people's minds, and it's a misunderstanding of what morality and virtue are. And so it's when someone feels that we are made virtuous by selecting certain views and clinging to them, grasping them strongly, tightly. I see this a lot with young people nowadays. And there's this culture, you may have heard of it, like this idea of cancel culture, right? Where, um, especially for anyone famous, anytime they're found doing something that is supposedly wrong, there's a whole host of people waiting to tear them down. Like, oh, did you hear this person said this or this person did that? And then they're canceled. They're kind of marked by society as evil or bad in this very definitive way. And all the, the uh sponsors and the advertisers who use this celebrity's face for their advertising of their product, they um they cancel those contracts, right? And there's this whole big thing that happens when someone gets canceled. um and then I've noticed that a lot of people will, again, there's this idea that if you are virtuous and moral, you will condemn that person for what they did. So now in society, there's this idea that in order to be good, like what good looks like, goodness in someone looks like the condemning of others who are bad. And I have to say, I just do not think this is what the Buddha was pointing to when he taught about virtue. This is not morality, guys. Um, this is a mistake. We're not meant to have this ultra critical eye that is quick to point out when a mistake is made and then judge. That is not in line with Dhamma. It's not in line with your own self interest. And you will find that if you take this idea as moral, it will hurt you. As Ajahn Sona said, Ajahn Sona didn't say anything that I just said, by the way, but anyway, this is a Canadian monk who I admire, but he once said that critical thinking, right, is taught in schools. It's it's basically taught that to be intelligent is to think critically, right? And he said it's like a knife that we sharpen. We criticize things. We think critically. And so we cut things down with this knife. And then he said we take that knife to our own neck. We take that knife to our own neck. And I've seen this a lot with younger people, and really it's with people of all demographics. But if you believe that condemning others, judging others is what makes you good, you will end up judging yourself. You'll end up in this place of like wondering, oh, did I do the right thing? Did I say it right? Did I do I need to apologize? And this leads to confusion. It doesn't lead to samadhi, it leads to confusion. In fact, all of this is activity that's driven by the five hindrances, right? Criticizing, judging is the second hindrance of aversion. If you want to practice virtue, it's really about assessing the quality of the energy, the feelings, the moods, the preoccupations, the habits of the mind. Again, morality, virtue is about assessing and purifying the quality of your own heart, how you feel. And this other problem of, judging others and blaming others is that it strips your power. I've heard one YouTube psychologist, or I saw a clip where someone called it externalizing. And so perhaps this is a phrase in Western psychology, externalizing. When you externalize or blame something external for how you feel, and then you have to go fix that external thing. And this is totally in opposition with what the Buddha was talking about. I mean, yes, there are times where you need to attend to external circumstances, but really the main point, and what is almost always the culprit, is your own heart. What is in your own mind and heart? That's where we have power and agency. That's where we can affect change. And when we change that, everything else changes. And man, this point is so important. It's like how many of you in your marriages, in your relationships, your friendships, um, your work relationships, when you don't feel good, can you notice the habit to blame the other person? So anyone who's married will quickly recognize this. Yes, right? If you're not feeling good, very quickly, and this is like in the context of, let's say, an argument in a marriage or in a relationship, we're very quick to blame the other person. And if you listen to what's going on in the media and this kind of uh this growing movement of cancel culture and condemning others and almost like delighting in the downfall of others, it's very easy to get into this idea of like they are wrong, I'm right. The relationship is not going to work until they recognize they're wrong and they change everything they're doing and blah 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 blah. And this is a sickness. Um, it's not effective. It doesn't work. You can try it. If you're not willing to change your own heart, how can you expect to change someone else's? If you're not willing to change your own heart, how can you expect to change someone else's? Are you even qualified to assess someone else's heart? Just try this other way where you point your attention inwards and you attribute how you feel to internal qualities, habits, practices. Just try this. If you stop blaming what's out there, you will start to feel your power, your possibility. This is when strength comes. And take care when you do this. For many of you, it's like this. For some of you, you will likely judge yourself too harshly, and that kind of aversion towards oneself is not helpful. But there are others who will not judge themselves enough in the sense of they won't be, you won't have the awareness and sensitivity to recognize what you're doing wrong. So we kind of will sort of be bouncing between these two. For most people, I find they have an inclination towards one of these. And so if that's the case, I would tend to encourage them to go towards the other side. If you're judging yourself too harshly, you need to go easy on yourself. Not don't take it so personally. You are a changeable being, capable of change. Remember your own goodness. Remember that you want to be good, and focus on that, the desire for goodness. Allow that to uplift you. Or if you're on the other end of the spectrum and there's nothing wrong with you, it's everyone else who's got the issue. I would recommend really trying to connect with your own heart. You can do this by spreading your awareness throughout your whole body. And whenever you remember, keep one eye on the body and really just feel what it's like to be you. And if you pay attention, there will be these pockets of time where you're able to be more vulnerable, more open with yourself, more honest with yourself. And just a quick caveat here, things like alcohol, weed, drugs, a lot of video game playing or TV, a lot of these kind of very stimulating uh, things that are so addictive and um, mess up our dopamine, you know, um, these things can make us really numb to ourselves. And so I find, again, a lot of people, a lot of young people, are just so numb to their own hearts that they're not able to see clearly. And that's really okay. You can just start to go in this other direction where you're not doing as much of those activities and you're just spending time feeling your body. Go out in nature, go for a walk, take care of your health, get the right nutrients, sleep well, do all of these things, and you'll start to gain in this sensitivity towards yourself. And then this idea of virtue will become more and more clear. It's not about criticizing what's out there or measuring oneself with what's out there. It's about coming into awareness with the qualities in your own heart and starting to discern or understand what qualities lead to your suffering and suffering of others, and what qualities lead away from suffering. And this is in Buddhism, it's called skillfulness and unskillfulness. Uh, you'll start to recognize what is unskillful in your own heart, and bit by bit, you'll gain control of this, more and more power, and you'll find that it has a dramatic effect of those around you. I can think of certain relationships in my life where for years I wanted the other person to change. And in my mind, even with all this Dhamma and all the things that I've read and practiced, my mind was so quick to just criticize this other person, you know, because I'd be so bothered by them and bothered by their anger or whatever it was. And what I found is that when my own heart matures and I'm bothered less, somehow that other person starts to behave differently around me. There was some kind of dependency there. And it's like when we're bothered less, when we let go more and we don't cling so much, our mode of perceiving changes. We're able to perceive a bit differently. And so we were able to see that person in a different light, in a different way. And that allows them to change. It's in a very mystical, magical way. So, again, in summary, let go of your views. Stop conflating or confusing holding views. Stop confusing holding views for morality. It's not morality. Stop delighting in the canceling of others, in the condemning of others. Stop condemning yourself. We are all worthy and capable of redemption. Stop believing that you know the right standards of virtue for someone else. Stop complaining. Stop taking things so seriously, so personally. Let go. Feel the freedom available. The Nibbana Dhatu. Feel the cooling of letting go. May all living beings be well. May you be well. May I be well. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. To the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, bow down.